Story 1. The Dalton Highway Reversal. The mile markers on the Dalton Highway were counting backward, and Thomas Brennan's odometer insisted he'd been driving north for 6 hours even though every sign showed him traveling south toward Fairbanks instead of north toward Deadhorse. The wrongness of it made his stomach clench, made his hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel despite the negative 38-degree temperature outside his Kenworth's heated cab. Thomas had been hauling drilling equipment up the Dalton for 11 years, knew every frost heave and turn of Alaska's most dangerous road. He'd left Fairbanks at 4 a.m. on January 19, 2024, heading north with 42,000 pounds of pipe and machinery. Now, according to his GPS, he was 317 miles north of Fairbanks, approaching Prudhoe Bay. But the mile markers told a different story. They showed him at mile marker 93, less than 100 miles from Fairbanks, traveling south. "That's impossible," Thomas said aloud, his voice swallowed by the diesel engine's rumble. "I've been driving north for 6 hours. I haven't turned around." But the evidence was undeniable. The next marker confirmed it, mile 92. He was moving south. Except his GPS showed his position north of the Arctic Circle, showed him approaching Deadhorse, showed his destination less than an hour away. Thomas grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker 19, anyone northbound on the Dalton? I'm having some navigation issues." Static answered, not the normal static of poor reception, but something rhythmic, pulsing, almost like breathing. Thomas tried different channels. Every single one produced the same breathing static. His satellite phone showed no signal. His cell phone showed no signal. Even his emergency beacon refused to activate, the LED just blinking red and failing to connect. Thomas was completely isolated on a highway that couldn't decide which direction it was pointing. The sun hung low on the horizon, 10 a.m. daylight in January, this far north barely qualified as daylight, casting everything in shades of gray and blue. The Brooks Range loomed to his right, jagged peaks cutting the sky. To his left, the tundra stretched endless and white. Normal. Everything looked completely normal except for the mile markers that kept insisting he was traveling the wrong direction. Thomas had been driving professionally for 19 years, the last 11 exclusively on the Dalton. He'd survived whiteouts that reduced visibility to zero, had nursed trucks with failing engines across 100 miles of isolation, had dealt with mechanical failures and wildlife encounters, and the brutal cold that could kill an exposed person in minutes. He was not a man who panicked easily. But this was different. This violated basic reality. He knew which direction he was traveling. His body could feel the truck moving forward north away from Fairbanks. But the physical evidence, mile markers, the actual numbered signs bolted to posts, contradicted everything else. Mile marker 87, 86, 85. Thomas pressed harder on the accelerator, pushing the Kenworth to 65 miles per hour, faster than was safe on the icy road. If he was somehow actually traveling south, he needed to turn around. But there'd been no place to turn around. No intersections, no pull-offs wide enough for a 53-foot trailer. The Dalton was one continuous northbound lane and one continuous southbound lane with nothing between them but painted lines and occasional turnouts. His rearview mirrors showed empty highway behind him. The road ahead curved gently through a valley, disappearing behind a low ridge. No other vehicles in sight, which wasn't unusual. Traffic on the Dalton was sparse even in summer. In January, Thomas sometimes went hours without seeing another truck. Mile marker 73. Thomas's chest tightened. He destarted this trip at mile marker 0 in Fairbanks. He'd driven north, watched the markers count up, 10, 20, 50, 100, 200. He de-stopped for fuel at Coldfoot at mile marker 175. He remembered filling the tank, remembered the attendant commenting on the extreme cold, remembered pulling back onto the highway and continuing north. That had been 3 hours ago. So how was he now at mile marker 73, traveling south according to the signs? Thomas slowed the truck and pulled onto a narrow turnout. He killed the engine and sat in silence, trying to make sense of what was happening. His logbook showed 6 hours of driving. His fuel gauge showed he'd burned through a quarter tank, consistent with the distance his GPS claimed he'd traveled. Everything inside the truck insisted he'd driven 300 miles north. Everything outside the truck insisted he'd driven south and was now less than 75 miles from Fairbanks. Thomas climbed out of the cab. The cold hit him like a physic. Al force stealing his breath, freezing the moisture in his nostrils instantly. He dressed properly, insulated coveralls, heavy parka, winter boots rated to -60, but the cold didn't care. It searched for any exposed skin, any gap in the layers, trying to find flesh it could destroy. He walked to the mile marker, 73. The number was painted clearly on reflective material, impossible to misread. Thomas walked back along the highway 50 yards to the previous marker, 74. Heading in the direction his truck was pointing, the markers counted down. He was definitely oriented southbound. But that made no sense. He hadn't turned around. The Dalton didn't allow U-turns for vehicles his size. There was nowhere he could have reversed direction. Thomas returned to his truck and pulled up the satellite view on his GPS. The image showed his position 317 miles north of Fairbanks, almost at Deadhorse. He zoomed in. The GPS placed him on a section of highway that should have been showing mile markers in the high 200s. He looked at the physical mile marker again, 73. "This isn't possible," Thomas said. His voice sounded thin in the vast silence of the Alaskan wilderness. "This is not possible." He started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, continuing in the direction he'd been traveling. If the mile markers were correct, he'd reach Fairbanks in another hour. If his GPS was correct, he'd reach Deadhorse in another hour. One of them had to be right. Mile marker 68, 62, 57. The sun, which should have been climbing toward its pathetic midday height, was descending instead. Going down, setting at 10:30 in the morning. Thomas's hands clenched the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. The sun didn't set at 10:30 in the morning. Even in January, even in the Arctic, the sun rose and stayed up for a few hours before setting. It didn't reverse course. But he watched it happen. Watched the pale disk sink toward the mountains. Watched the already dim daylight fade further into blue twilight. His truck's headlights automatically triggered, sensing the darkness. The high beams cut through the gathering gloom, illuminating the white highway and the endless snow on either side. Mile marker 41. Thomas's CB radio crackled. The breathing static resolved into a voice. His voice, speaking words he hadn't said. "The Dalton Highway exists in two directions simultaneously. North and south occupy the same space. You're traveling both directions at once, Thomas. You're approaching Fairbanks and Deadhorse simultaneously. In 41 miles, you'll reach both destinations and neither. You'll arrive at a place that is everywhere and nowhere on this highway." Thomas grabbed his mic with a shaking hand. "Who is this? How are you doing this?" "This is you at the end of the highway, you after you arrive. I'm warning you, don't reach mile marker 0. Turn around now. Go back the way you came. Accept that you're traveling north even though the markers say south. Trust your GPS, not your eyes." "I can't turn around. There's nowhere to turn around." "Then you'll reach 0, and when you do, you'll understand what the Dalton Highway really is. You'll understand that some roads don't transport vehicles from one location to another. They transport vehicles from existence to non-existence, from being to unbeing. The Dalton runs to Deadhorse. It also runs to nowhere. Same road, same direction, two destinations occupying the same coordinates." The radio went silent. Mile marker 28. Thomas tried to slow down, tried to stop the truck, but his foot pressed the accelerator instead. Not his decision. His body acted independently, keeping the truck moving at 65 miles per hour, eating up miles that counted down toward something Thomas increasingly didn't want to reach. The darkness was complete now, even though his watch insisted it was 11:14 a.m. His headlights showed the highway stretching ahead, white lines and gray asphalt and snow berms on either side. Normal, except for the sun that had set mid-morning and the mile markers that counted backward and the voice on the radio that sounded like him but came from somewhere else. Mile marker 14. Thomas could feel his body temperature dropping despite the heater blasting at maximum. His breath came in white clouds. Ice formed on the inside of the windshield, fractal patterns spreading across the glass. He wiped at it with his glove, but it formed faster than he could clear it. The temperature gauge on his dashboard showed negative 67 degrees outside. Impossible. That was cold enough to freeze diesel fuel, cold enough to shatter metal. His engine should have seized. But the truck kept running, kept rolling forward, kept carrying him toward mile marker 0. Mile marker 7. Through the frost-covered windshield, Thomas saw lights ahead. Fairbanks, it had to be. Fairbanks. The city lights, civilization, safety. He'd made it. Whatever was happening, he'd reached his starting point or his destination or something that looked like a city. But as he got closer, the lights resolved into something else. Not city lights, not buildings or street lamps or signs of human habitation. Stars. The highway ended at mile marker 0, but instead of connecting to another road or entering a city, it simply stopped, terminated. The asphalt ended in a ragged edge, and beyond that edge was space. Actual space. The infinite black void between stars, visible not above or in the distance but directly ahead at ground level, like the Earth itself had been cut away and replaced with the vacuum of the universe. Thomas slammed the brakes. The truck skidded, jackknifed, slid sideways toward the edge where highway met void. He fought the wheel, trying to straighten out, trying to stop before momentum carried him over. The truck stopped 6 feet from the edge. Thomas sat frozen, staring through the windshield at the impossible sight ahead. The highway ended. Space began. Stars hung in the darkness where Alaska should have been, constellations he didn't recognize arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. His radio, "You're at both ends of the highway now, Thomas, at Fairbanks and Deadhorse simultaneously, at the beginning and the end, at existence and void. The Dalton Highway is a bridge between real geography and impossible geography. Most drivers never notice. They drive north and arrive north, drive south and arrive south, never realizing they're traveling through a fold in space where 2 destinations occupy the same point. But you noticed. You saw the mile markers counting wrong. And once you notice, once you become aware of the fold, you can't unnotice. You're stuck between." Thomas tried to put the truck in reverse. The transmission wouldn't engage. He tried opening the door. It wouldn't budge, frozen shut, or locked by something other than ice. "What happens now?" Thomas asked. "You wait. Eventually, another driver will come along, someone else who notices the markers counting wrong. They'll find your truck here at mile marker 0, abandoned, no sign of the driver. They'll investigate. They'll call it in. And while they're distracted, while they're examining your truck and trying to make sense of what happened, the highway will fold around them too. They'll become the next traveler stuck between north and south, between existence and void. And me. You'll be here, forever here. The highway keeps what it catches. You're part of the fold now, Thomas, part of the space between destinations. You'll watch other drivers approach mile marker 0. You'll try to warn them on the CB radio. Some will listen and turn back. Most won't. Most will end up here with you. And slowly, over years or decades or centuries, this place will fill with trucks and drivers, all of us trapped in the moment between departure and arrival, forever traveling, forever reaching the end of a highway that has no end. Thomas looked in his rearview mirror. The highway behind him was gone, replaced by more stars, more void. He was surrounded by space, his truck a tiny metal capsule floating in darkness, the Dalton Highway reduced to the single patch of asphalt directly beneath his tires. His watch stopped working, hands frozen at 11:47 a.m. His phone showed no date, no time, just an error message. The only light came from his dashboard and headlights, and even those were beginning to dim as if the void was absorbing photons, draining light itself. Thomas tried to scream, but no sound emerged. The void didn't carry sound. He was alone in perfect silence with only his thoughts and the slow realization that he would be here forever, waiting at mile marker 0, watching other drivers approach, trying to warn them, failing most of the time, accumulating companions in this nowhere space where the Dalton Highway folded back on itself and trapped travelers in the gap between north and south. He'd been driving for 11 years on this highway. Now he'd be driving forever, moving without moving, traveling without arriving, stuck at both ends of a road that claimed to connect 2 points, but actually connected nothing to nowhere. The last thing Thomas saw before his headlights died completely was another set of lights approaching from the void. Another truck. Another driver who'd noticed something wrong with the mile markers and would soon discover what Thomas had discovered. That some roads don't have destinations, only traps, and the Dalton Highway's greatest secret was that it led to a place where direction lost all meaning and travelers became permanent residents of the space between here and there. Story 2, The White Horse Radio. Catherine Wu's AM radio had been picking up a station that didn't exist for the last 73 miles between Tok and the Canadian border, broadcasting what sounded like trucking reports from 18 years in the future. The calm male voice read weather conditions and road closures for dates in February 2042, described accidents that hadn't happened, yet involving trucks that hadn't been manufactured yet, gave traffic updates for a highway system that didn't match current maps. Catherine had been hauling freight between Anchorage and Whitehorse for 9 years. She knew every mile of the Alaska Highway, knew which radio stations reached which sections, knew that between Tok and the border there was mostly static with occasional bleed-through from Whitehorse stations. But this broadcast was different, crystal clear, strong signal, and absolutely impossible. "Attention all drivers approaching the Yukon border," the voice said. "Highway reconstruction in Sector 79 has created temporal displacement zone. All vehicles must maintain speeds above 60 kilometers per hour through affected area. Falling below minimum speed will result in time slippage. Repeat, do not slow down in Sector 79. Catherine checked her speedometer. She was doing 55 miles per hour, about 88 kilometers, well above 60. But what the hell was a temporal displacement zone? And Sector 79? The Alaska Highway didn't use sector designations. She tried changing stations. Every frequency produced the same broadcast, like it was overriding every other signal. "This is Temporal Traffic Control broadcasting emergency warnings for drivers in transition year 2024. If you can hear this message, you are experiencing forward temporal bleed. Your radio is receiving signals from 18 years in your future. Do not be alarmed. Continue maintaining speed. Do not stop. Do not attempt to exit your vehicle. The displacement is temporary and will resolve once you cross into Canadian territory." "This is insane," Catherine muttered. She'd been driving for 8 hours straight from Anchorage, was tired, maybe hallucinating. Road fatigue could cause auditory hallucinations. She'd heard about drivers who went without sleep for too long and started hearing voices or seeing things that weren't there. But this felt different, too detailed, too specific. The voice rattled off coordinates and reference numbers, described road conditions with precision, mentioned vehicle types Catherine didn't recognize. "Tesla autonomous hauler, northbound kilometer 473, advise reduction to transition speed. Hydrogen fuel cell class 8, southbound sector 66, cleared for temporal crossing." Catherine's GPS flickered. For just a moment, the map showed roads that didn't exist, cities in locations that were currently wilderness, infrastructure that hadn't been built. Then it snapped back to normal, showing her position 5 miles south of the Canadian border. The voice on the radio: "Catherine Wu, Alaska Commercial License 73824, you are approaching temporal boundary. Prepare for minor disorientation. Your journey will continue normally once crossing is complete. Do not attempt to turn back. Forward progression is the only stable option." Catherine's blood went cold. The voice knew her name, knew her license number, information that should have been private that a broadcast shouldn't have access to. "How do you know who I am?" Catherine shouted at the radio. "Your vehicle's electronic systems are broadcasting identification data that exists in our current timeline, but has not yet been implemented in yours. From our perspective, you are a historical vehicle, an antique, passing through our temporal zone. We are required by international law to monitor and assist all temporal crossers to prevent paradox formation." "This isn't real. I'm hallucinating. I need to pull over, get some sleep." "Negative, do not stop. Stopping in a temporal displacement zone will trap you between times. You'll be unable to move forward or backward, stuck in a moment that exists in 2 timeframes simultaneously. Continue driving. 5 kilometers to temporal boundary resolution." Catherine pressed the accelerator, pushing her Freightliner to 65 miles per hour. The road ahead looked normal: gray asphalt, snow berms, the familiar landscape of eastern Alaska in January. But something felt wrong. The air had a quality she couldn't describe, like reality was slightly out of focus, like she was seeing the world through a filter that made everything just a bit off. Her watch stopped working. The digital display froze at 3:47 p.m., then began counting backward: 3:46, 3:45. Catherine stared at it, her heart racing. Time was moving in reverse, or the watch was, or her perception was. "This is not happening," she said, but her voice sounded strange, delayed, like the sound waves had to travel through extra distance to reach her own ears. The radio: 2 kilometers to boundary. Temporal distortion increasing as you near the threshold between 2024 and 2042. You may experience sensory anomalies. These are normal and temporary. Catherine looked in her side mirror and saw her truck from 18 years in the future. The same Freightliner, but modified, updated with technology that didn't exist yet. The paint was faded and chipped, the cab showing years of wear, but it was unmistakably her truck, her unit number, driving parallel to her current position. In the driver's seat of the future truck sat an older version of herself, 51 instead of 33, gray streaks in black hair, deeper lines around the eyes, but definitely Catherine, staring back at her younger self with an expression of recognition and profound sadness. The older Catherine mouthed words: "Don't stop driving." Then the future truck dissolved, phasing out of existence, leaving only empty highway in Catherine's mirror. "What is this?" Catherine screamed. "What's happening to me?" "You are experiencing temporal overlap. The highway exists in multiple times simultaneously. Most drivers pass through without noticing because their perception is locked to their original time frame. But some drivers, approximately 3%, are temporally sensitive. Their consciousness bleeds across time frames. They see the highway as it exists in past and future simultaneously." Catherine's hands were shaking on the wheel. She wanted to stop, wanted to pull over and process what was happening, but the voice had been clear. Stopping meant getting trapped. She had to keep moving. The road ahead split into multiple overlapping versions. Catherine could see the highway as it existed now, a 2-lane road through wilderness. But she could also see it as it would exist in 18 years, a 4-lane highway with automated lane markers and charging stations for electric vehicles. And beneath both of those, she could see an even older version, a gravel road from the 1940s when the Alaska Highway was first built. All 3 roads occupied the same space, phasing in and out of solidity like they were taking turns being real. Catherine drove through the overlapping timeframes, her truck existing simultaneously in 2024 and 2042 and 1943. She could see other vehicles, modern trucks like hers, futuristic autonomous haulers, and ancient World War II-era military vehicles, all of them traveling the same route, all of them oblivious to the others except for a few drivers who turned and stared at Catherine with the same horrified recognition that she felt staring back. The radio voice: 500 meters to boundary. Once you cross into Canadian territory, the temporal overlap will resolve. You'll return to your original time frame exclusively. However, memories of what you've experienced will remain. Most temporal crossers suffer psychological trauma from exposure to future or past versions of themselves or their vehicles. Support services are available through the International Temporal Displacement Association, though that organization does not exist in your current time and won't be founded until 2037. Catherine could see the border checkpoint ahead. It looked normal in her time frame: a small building, Canadian flags, barriers, and guard stations. But in the future time frame, it was a massive complex with scanning equipment and automated systems. And in the past time frame, it was just a hand-painted sign marking the boundary. She drove toward it, her speedometer reading 70 miles per hour, her watch still counting backward, her radio still broadcasting from 18 years ahead. As she crossed the border, reality snapped back into singular focus. The overlapping time frames collapsed into one. Catherine was driving her truck in 2024 exclusively, with no bleed-through from past or future. The road was just a road. Her watch reset to current time. The radio dissolved into static and then picked up a normal Whitehorse station playing country music. Catherine pulled into the first truck stop on the Canadian side and sat in her cab for 20 minutes, breathing hard, trying to convince herself that what she'd experienced was real and not some elaborate hallucination. She grabbed her phone and searched for temporal displacement zones highway. Nothing. No results. No news articles about trucks passing through time. No government warnings. No International Temporal Displacement Association. But then she checked the date on a news website. February 7th, 2024. Except Catherine distinctly remembered leaving Anchorage on February 6th. She'd lost a day somewhere, or gained one. Time had skipped forward while she was in the displacement zone. She called her dispatcher. "Hey, it's Catherine. I'm at the border, running about a day late." "A day? You should be early. You left yesterday morning." "Yesterday was the 6th. Today's the 7th. "Catherine, today is the 6th. It's 4 p.m. February 6th. You left Anchorage at 6 a.m. today. You've been driving for 10 hours, not 34. Catherine looked at her watch. 4:03 p.m. February 6th, but she remembered crossing the border at 3:47 p.m. on February 7th. She'd lost a day. Or the day had been erased, or something had happened to time that didn't fit normal causality. She drove the rest of her route to Whitehorse in silence, delivered her cargo, and started the return trip to Alaska. When she reached the border crossing, heading south now, she tensed, waiting for the radio to pick up the future broadcast again. It didn't. Normal static, normal stations, normal time. But as Catherine passed through the stretch of highway where the temporal displacement had occurred, her AM radio crackled briefly with a familiar voice. "Catherine Wu, southbound crossing complete. Thank you for your cooperation during temporal overlap event 739. This incident has been logged. You are flagged as temporally sensitive. Future crossings may result in additional displacement experiences. Drive safely." The message ended. Normal radio returned. Catherine never reported what happened. Who would believe her? She had no proof except her own memory of seeing herself 18 years older, driving a truck that didn't exist yet, on a highway that existed in 3 timeframes simultaneously. She continued hauling freight between Alaska and Canada for 3 more years. Every time she passed through that section of highway between Tok and the border, she wondered if the displacement would happen again, if she'd see the future or the past bleeding through into the present. It never did. But Catherine never forgot the look on her older self's face, the sadness and recognition, the unspoken message in those aged eyes. Something happened in the next 18 years, something that made 51-year-old Catherine look at her younger self with regret and warning. Catherine Wu is 41 now in 2032. In 10 years, she'll be 51. And she knows that someday, driving southbound through that stretch of highway, she'll experience another temporal displacement. She'll be the older version in the future truck, looking back at her younger self, trying to mouth a warning across 18 years. And she still doesn't know what she'll be trying to say, what warning she'll be desperately trying to communicate, what happens in the years ahead that's important enough to echo backward through time. She just knows that time on the Alaska highway doesn't work like time elsewhere, that some stretches of road exist in multiple moments simultaneously, that 3% of drivers are temporally sensitive and experience the bleed. And that someday, Catherine will understand why her future self looked so sad, why the warning was so urgent, why driving forward meant driving into something she already knew she couldn't prevent. The radio stays silent now, but Catherine listens anyway, waiting for the broadcast from the future, waiting for the next temporal displacement, waiting to learn what happens in 2042 that her 51-year-old self already knows and her 41-year-old self desperately needs to understand before it's too late. Story 3, The Permafrost Cargo. The reefer unit on Jason DeMarco's trailer had been set to -40°F since he'd loaded in Prudhoe Bay, but the temperature readout inside the cargo space showed -217 degrees, which was cold enough to liquefy oxygen. cold enough that matter itself should start behaving strangely. Jason had checked the sensors 3 times, recalibrated the system twice, and the reading remained impossible but consistent. His cargo manifest said he was hauling 12 pallets of ice core samples from climate research stations, bound for a laboratory in Fairbanks. Routine scientific transport. Except ice cores didn't require negative 200-degree temperatures. Regular freezer temperatures, yes. Arctic conditions, absolutely. But not temperatures that existed only in laboratory cryogenic systems or the vacuum of space. Jason had been driving the Dalton Highway for 6 years, hauling everything from drilling equipment to food supplies to fuel. Ice core samples were unusual but not unprecedented. What was unprecedented was the cold radiating from his trailer, cold so intense he could feel it in the cab despite the heater blasting at maximum, despite the insulated firewall between tractor and trailer. He'd left Prudhoe Bay at 6 a.m. on March 3, 2024. Now, 8 hours into the 500-mile journey to Fairbanks, Jason was starting to think something was seriously wrong with his cargo. The first sign came at mile marker 392, when frost started forming on the inside of his cab. Not normal condensation frost. This was instant crystallization, geom. Itric patterns spreading across every surface, following mathematical rules that made Jason's eyes hurt when he tried to focus on them. The second sign came 10 miles later when his CB radio started picking up voices speaking a language that didn't sound human. Not animal sounds. Not static or interference. An actual language, structured and deliberate, but using phonemes that no human throat should be able to produce. The third sign came at mile marker 367, when Jason looked in his side mirror and saw that his trailer was surrounded by a visible cold field, air itself freezing and falling as snow, creating a localized blizzard that followed his truck like a storm cloud tethered to the refrigerated cargo. Jason grabbed his satellite phone and called his dispatcher. "We've got a problem with the Prudhoe Bay science cargo." "What kind of problem?" "The reefer unit is showing negative 217 degrees. The cargo is generating a cold field that's affecting the environment around my truck, and I'm hearing things on the CB that shouldn't exist." Silence, then, "What do you mean hearing things?" "Voices, not English. Not any language I recognize, coming from every channel simultaneously." More silence. "Jason, pull over. Don't open the trailer. We're sending a hazmat team to intercept you." "What's really in the trailer?" "Ice cores, that's what the manifest says." "Bullshit, ice cores don't do this." The dispatcher's voice dropped to a whisper. "What they told me is you're hauling samples from deep permafrost excavation. Core samples from 12,000 years ago from the end of the last ice age. Apparently they found something in the ice. Something that's been frozen since the Pleistocene. Something that generates extreme cold. They need it transported to a containment facility in Fairbanks." "Why didn't you tell me this before I loaded?" "Because if drivers knew what they were hauling, they'd refuse. Look, just pull over. Don't open the trailer. Don't investigate. Wait for the hazmat team." Jason's windshield cracked, not from impact, from cold. A fracture appeared in the center and spread outward in branching patterns, the safety glass failing under thermal stress. "I'm pulling over," Jason said, "but this is..." His phone died mid-sentence. Battery drained instantly, the screen going black, the device becoming inert in his hand. The voices on the CB grew louder, more insistent. Jason could almost understand them now, could almost grasp the meaning behind the alien phonemes. They were saying something about cold, about preservation, about waiting, about finally waking after millennia of frozen sleep. Jason slowed the truck and pulled onto a turnout. The moment he stopped moving, the temperature in the cab plummeted. His breath came out in white clouds. His skin burned where air touched it. The heater was still running, still blasting hot air, but the cold from the trailer was overwhelming it, flooding the cab with Arctic conditions that shouldn't be possible. He needed to disconnect the trailer, needed to separate the tractor from whatever was in that cargo space. Jason climbed out of the cab, and the cold outside was somehow less intense than the cold inside. Negative 42 degrees, brutal by normal standards, but preferable to the supernatural cold radiating from the trailer. Jason approached the trailer coupling, intending to release the fifth wheel and leave the cargo where it sat. But as he reached for the release handle, the trailer doors opened. He hadn't touched them, hadn't unlocked them. They simply swung open from the inside, and a wall of vapor poured out, so cold it was visible as a dense white fog that poured over the ground and spread outward, freezing everything it touched. Inside the trailer, the 12 pallets were covered in ice that glowed faintly blue. And emerging from the ice, pulling themselves free like insects from cocoons, were figures. Tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at too many joints and faces that might have been human 10,000 years ago, but had been altered by cold and time into something else. They moved slowly, awkwardly, like they were remembering how bodies worked. Their eyes, multiple eyes, arranged in vertical rows, focused on Jason with intelligence and hunger. One of them spoke, the alien language from the CB radio, but now coming from a physical mouth, from vocal cords that clicked and whistled and produced sounds that made Jason's inner ears hurt. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning transmitted directly into his mind. Cold, need cold, cannot survive warmth, must stay frozen. You will keep us frozen. I can't, Jason said, backing away. I don't know how. You are warm, you generate heat. We will use you to regulate temperature. You will become part of refrigeration system. Your body heat will be harvested to maintain our cold stasis. More figures emerged from the trailer, 6 of them now 8. All moving toward Jason with that same awkward, relearning motion gait. They surrounded him, their bodies radiating cold so intense that Jason's exposed skin was already showing signs of frostbite. Please, Jason said. I'm just the driver, I didn't know what I was hauling. You hauled us from permafrost prison. Now you will help maintain our survival until we reach destination. You will be added to refrigeration system. Your heat will keep us cold. One of the figures touched Jason's arm. Where it made contact, his flesh froze instantly. Not frostbite. Actual freezing, cellular water crystallizing, tissue becoming solid ice. The pain was beyond anything Jason had experienced, a burning, freezing agony that made him scream. But his scream came out as vapor. His lungs were freezing, the air in his chest turning to liquid, then solid. He tried to run, but his legs were already immobile, frozen in place, his body becoming a statue of ice. The figures pulled him toward the trailer. Jason's consciousness remained intact even as his body ceased functioning. He could think, could perceive, but couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything except experience the sensation of being absorbed into the refrigeration system. They mounted him inside the trailer, connected him to tubes and wires that looked organic and technological simultaneously. His body heat, the residual warmth from a human metabolism that was shutting down but not yet completely dead, was being extracted, being used to power the cooling system that kept these ancient creatures frozen. Jason could see through his frozen eyes, could watch as the creatures climbed back into their ice cocoons, settling into hibernation, using his warmth to generate the cold they needed to survive. He was a battery, a thermal converter, a living component in a system designed to maintain negative 200-degree temperatures. The trailer doors closed. Darkness surrounded Jason except for the faint blue glow of the ice. He could hear the reefer unit running, but now he was part of it, his body incorporated into its function. Time passed. Jason didn't know how much. His frozen consciousness experienced minutes or hours or days without ability to measure. He was aware but not alive, preserved but not functional, trapped in a state between death and existence. Eventually, the truck started moving again. Someone had found the abandoned rig, had called in the incident, had sent a driver to complete the delivery. Jason could feel the motion, could sense the truck rolling south toward Fairbanks. The new driver would have no idea what was in the trailer, would have no idea that one of the components keeping the refrigeration system running was a human being, frozen solid, consciousness trapped, serving as a thermal regulator for entities that should have stayed buried in permafrost. The truck delivered its cargo to a facility in Fairbanks. Men in hazmat suits opened the trailer, examined the contents, and carefully removed the 12 pallets. They also removed Jason, still frozen, still aware, still serving his function as part of the system. They transported him to a laboratory, stored him in a cryogenic chamber, studied him. Years passed. Jason remained frozen, remained conscious, experienced every moment of being a specimen, a subject, a curiosity. The creatures he'd transported were kept in adjacent chambers, still hibernating, still requiring the extreme cold that Jason's body helped maintain. Scientists occasionally discussed him, debated whether his consciousness would survive if they attempted to thaw him, whether his frozen state was reversible. They decided the risk was too high. Better to keep him as he was, a functional component of the cryogenic system, a living power source for maintaining the cold. Jason couldn't scream, couldn't beg for death, couldn't communicate his suffering. He existed in frozen stasis, aware but helpless, serving a function he'd never agreed to, keeping ancient horrors preserved at the cost of his own humanity. And in the permafrost across Alaska and Siberia and northern Canada, there were more of them. More creatures frozen since the Pleistocene, waiting to be excavated, waiting to be transported, waiting for unsuspecting drivers to haul them from one location to another. The drivers never knew what they were carrying. They just drove, following manifests, trusting that ice core samples were exactly what the paperwork claimed. Until they were. Until the cargo revealed itself. Until the drivers became part of the refrigeration system, their warmth harvested, their consciousness preserved, their bodies transformed into components of a cold generation network that kept ancient things frozen and dormant. Jason DeMarco is still in that laboratory, still frozen, still aware, still serving his function after 11 years. His body hasn't aged, hasn't decayed, hasn't changed. He's perfectly preserved at negative 217 deg. Reese, his consciousness trapped in an ice-locked brain that cannot die but cannot live. He's not alone. Other drivers are there too. Men and women who hauled permafrost cargo, who became part of the system, who exist now as thermal regulators for entities that must stay frozen or else they'll wake and spread across a warming world. And the excavations continue. The permafrost keeps melting, the creatures keep being found, the transports keep needing drivers. Every driver who accepts a load of ice core samples from Arctic research stations is rolling the dice. Most hauls are exactly what they claim, simple frozen samples for scientific study. But some are not. Some are ancient horrors that require drivers to become more than drivers, to become part of the cargo, to serve a function they never imagined when they signed their contracts. Jason can't warn them, can't communicate, can only exist in his frozen hell, watching through unblinking eyes as new drivers arrive, as new victims are added to the system, as the network of thermal regulators grows larger. The cold expands, the creatures sleep, the drivers serve. And somewhere in Alaska, another truck is loading another shipment of ice cores. Another driver is accepting another routine haul. Another person is about to discover that some cargo requires more than just transportation. It requires sacrifice. It requires transformation. It requires becoming part of the freeze. Story 4, the Richardson Highway Echo. The semi-truck that Daniel Okonkwo passed at mile marker 187 on the Richardson Highway was identical to his own Peterbilt down to the rust pattern on the passenger door and the cracked mirror on the driver's side that he'd been meaning to replace for 6 months. Same unit number, same company logo, same trailer configuration. It was his truck, exactly his truck, heading south while he headed north, driven by someone who looked exactly like him. Daniel didn't believe in coincidences of that magnitude. He also didn't believe in supernatural phenomena. But he absolutely believed his own eyes, and his eyes had just watched himself drive past in the opposite direction. He grabbed his CB radio. Southbound Peterbilt at mile 187, this is northbound Peterbilt, same marker, come back. His own voice answered through the speaker. I was hoping you wouldn't see me. Most echoes don't notice each other. You must be the original. Who is this? What's going on? This is Daniel Okonkwo driving south from Fairbanks to Valdez. Same as you're driving north from Valdez to Fairbanks. Same truck, same cargo, same everything. I'm your echo created 2 hours ago when you passed through a temporal fold in the highway. Every driver generates echoes on this stretch of road. Most of them dissolve after a few minutes. Some persist longer. I've been driving for 2 hours and I'm starting to think I'm not going to dissolve. Daniel pulled over, his hands shaking. This was impossible. He hadn't passed through anything unusual. The Richardson Highway was a normal 4-lane road connecting Valdez to Fairbanks. He'd driven it hundreds of times in his 8 years of hauling cargo for North Star Logistics. "This isn't real," Daniel said. "I'm hallucinating." "You're not, and I'm not either, though I thought the same thing when I realized what I was. Check your logbook. You'll see that you have no memory of the last 2 hours. That's because those 2 hours branched off. I'm the branch, you're the trunk. When you passed through mile marker 203 about 2 hours ago, something split you, created a duplicate. I'm that duplicate, and I've been driving south while you drove north, and now we've passed each other and both become aware of the split." Daniel grabbed his logbook. The last entry he remembered making was at mile marker 203, 2 hours and 16 minutes ago. He'd noted road conditions, fuel level, time, but he had no memory of making subsequent entries. Yet there they were, in his handwriting, documenting the next 2 hours of driving. Except he hadn't written them, his echo had. The version of him that split off and started driving south. "This is insane," Daniel said. "It gets worse," the echo replied. "I'm not the only one. There are multiple echoes of you driving the Richardson Highway right now, some heading north, some heading south. All of us generated when you passed through that temporal fold at mile 203. We're all you, Daniel, all the same person, copied and sent in different directions. And I think we're going to keep multiplying every time one of us passes back through that fold." Daniel's mind raced. If this was true, if temporal folds could split drivers into echoes, then every truck on the Richardson Highway might be generating copies, creating a network of duplicates that drove the same routes, delivered the same cargo, lived the same lives. "How do I stop it?" Daniel asked. "I don't think you can. The fold exists. You drive through it. You split. Your echoes split again. Eventually, there will be hundreds of us, maybe thousands, all driving the Richardson Highway, all delivering cargo, all completely identical except for our starting positions and directions." Daniel pulled up his GPS and marked mile marker 203. If that was where the fold existed, he needed to avoid it on his return trip. He'd take an alternate route, stay off the Richardson Highway entirely. But then he remembered. He was under contract. His cargo had to be delivered to Fairbanks by 6 p.m. today. The Richardson Highway was the only route that would get him there on time. He had to drive back through the fold. "What happens when I pass through it again?" Daniel asked. "You split again, create more echoes. I passed through it heading south about 40 minutes ago. That's when I realized I was an echo, when I split again and met another version of myself who'd just been created. We talked briefly. He was terrified. I was starting to accept it. Now I'm trying to warn you, the original, that this is happening and will keep happening." Daniel's chest tightened. "So I'm going to generate infinite copies of myself." "Not infinite. The echoes seem to have limited duration. Most of us fade after a few hours. We just stop existing, dissolve back into whatever quantum foam created us. But some echoes persist longer. I've lasted 2 hours so far. I might last longer. And every time I pass through the fold, I create more echoes who might also persist. It's exponential growth." "Why is this happening?" "I don't know. Something about the Richardson Highway at mile marker 203 creates conditions where a single driver becomes multiple drivers. Maybe it's quantum mechanics. Maybe it's supernatural. Maybe it's just a glitch in causality that exists in that specific location. But it's real, it's happening, and you need to decide what to do about it." Daniel stared at the highway ahead. He had 3 choices: turn back and accept contract violation, continue forward and risk splitting into more echoes, or abandon the truck entirely and walk away from a career he'd built over 8 years. None of those choices were acceptable. "I'm going to Fairbanks," Daniel said. "I'm delivering my cargo. I'll deal with the fold when I reach it." "Then I'll see you again. Or another version of you will see another version of me. We're all the same person, Daniel, all equally real, all equally deserving of existence. Remember that when you pass through the fold and create new echoes, we're not copies, we're alternatives, branches of the same trunk. The radio went silent. Daniel pulled back onto the highway and continued north. Every mile brought him closer to the fold, closer to the point where he'd split into multiple selves, closer to becoming not a single person, but a distributed consciousness spread across multiple bodies, all driving the same highway. He reached mile marker 203 at 4:17 p.m. The highway looked completely normal. No visible distortion, no warning signs, no indication that this location was special or dangerous. Just asphalt and snow and the Alaska Range in the distance. Daniel drove through it. For a moment he felt something, a pulling sensation like his body was trying to exist in two places simultaneously. Then it passed. He was through the fold. He checked his mirrors. Behind him he saw his truck, still there, still following, except he was in his truck, which meant the truck behind him contained an echo, a duplicate Daniel who'd just been created by passing through the fold. The echo Daniel keyed his CB. So this is what it feels like. I'm the new echo, you're the one who just generated me. Daniel didn't respond. What could he say? Sorry for creating you? Sorry for duplicating your consciousness into a separate body that will probably dissolve in a few hours. He kept driving. At mile marker 231, he passed another version of himself heading south, then another at mile marker 265, then three more between 270 and 300. The Richardson Highway was filling with Daniel Okonkwo's, all of them driving Peterbilts, all of them hauling the same cargo, all of them equally confused and terrified. By the time Daniel reached Fairbanks and delivered his cargo, he'd counted 17 versions of himself on the highway. 17 echoes, all generated from a single driver passing through a single point. Daniel completed his delivery and faced a decision. Drive back to Valdez and generate more echoes, or refuse future runs on the Richardson Highway and accept reduced income from fewer available routes. He chose to keep driving. The money was good, the route was familiar, and he'd already created echoes. What were a few more? Over the next 3 months, Daniel passed through the fold at mile marker 203 87 times. Each time he split. Each time new echoes were created. The Richardson Highway. I became crowded with Daniel Okonkwo's, so many that other drivers started noticing, started reporting seeing the same truck with the same driver over and over on the same stretch of road. The echoes developed their own identities. Some decided to drive different routes, taking alternate jobs, branching away from the original Daniel's life. Others kept driving the Richardson Highway, kept splitting, kept multiplying. Daniel lost track of how many of him existed. Dozens, certainly. Maybe hundreds. All of them generated from that single point at mile marker 203, all of them equally real, all of them living separate but parallel lives. And Daniel realized something profound. He wasn't just one person anymore. He was a collective, a distributed consciousness. Every echo was him, and he was every echo. They thought differently, made different choices, experienced different events. But they were all Daniel Okonkwo, all equally valid versions of the same person. The fold had transformed him from a singular individual into a plural entity. Daniel stopped trying to prevent the splits, stopped worrying about generating echoes. He accepted what he'd become, a man who existed in multiple places simultaneously, a driver who could be in Valdez and Fairbanks at the same time, a consciousness that had learned to fragment and replicate and spread across Alaska's highway system. Other drivers started experiencing the same phenomenon, not just on the Richardson Highway, but on other routes. Mile markers where temporal folds existed, where single drivers became multiple drivers, where the boundary between self and other dissolved. The authorities investigated but found nothing. No physical anomaly. No explanation. Just reports from dozens of drivers who swore they'd seen themselves driving in opposite directions, who'd spoken to echoes on CB radios, who'd multiplied and split and become collectives. Daniel Okonkwo is still driving. Or rather, the Daniel Okonkwo's are still driving. All of them. Some version of him passes through mile marker 203 every few hours, generating new echoes, expanding the collective, becoming more distributed. He's not afraid anymore. He's accepted what he is. A person who proved that individual identity is an illusion, that consciousness can be copied and multiplied, that the boundary between oneself and many selves is thinner than anyone imagined. The fold remains. The echoes continue. And somewhere on the Richardson Highway, every hour of every day, Daniel Okonkwo passes himself driving in the opposite direction, raises a hand in greeting, and continues becoming more than he was, one split at a time. Story 5. The Sound from VALDZ. The sound started bleeding through Maria Ruiz's CB radio at 2:33 a.m., 14 miles outside Valdez, Alaska. A low-frequency hum that made her teeth ache and her vision blur, accompanied by what sounded like hundreds of voices whispering in unison, but slightly out of sync, creating a wave of noise that built and crashed and built again in rhythmic patterns that felt almost like breathing. Maria had been hauling freight from Valdez to Anchorage for 12 years. She knew every sound her Kenworth made, knew what was normal engine noise and what was mechanical problem. This sound wasn't coming from her truck. It was coming through the radio from somewhere external, somewhere broadcasting on every channel simultaneously. She tried changing frequencies. Channels 19, 17, 14, 21, all of them carried the same signal. Hum, whisper, build, crash, repeat. Like something vast was trying to communicate using radio waves, trying to speak but unable to form coherent words, only able to produce this disturbing approximation of language. Maria turned off the CB radio. The sound continued, now coming from her AM/FM radio even though it was also off. It was coming from the truck itself, from the metal frame and the dashboard and the wiring, like her entire vehicle had become a receiver for whatever was broadcasting this signal. She pulled over, killed the engine, and sat in silence. The sound faded but didn't disappear completely. Maria could still hear it, faint and distant, like it was coming from the mountains or the ocean or the ground itself. "What the hell?" Maria whispered. Her satellite phone rang. She answered, "Hello." The sound poured through the phone speaker, louder now, more intense, the whisper voices building to a crescendo that made Maria's ears hurt. She dropped the phone and covered her ears, but the sound was inside her head now, bypassing her physical hearing, transmitted directly into her brain somehow. The voices resolved into something almost like words. "Come to Valdez, come to the harbor, come see what we found, come join us, come become us." "Who are you?" Maria shouted. "We are the sound, we are what lives in the deep water. We are what the oil pipeline disturbed when they drilled into the seafloor. We are W. Aching, we are hungry, we need more, come to us." Maria started her engine and turned the truck around, heading back toward Anchorage, away from Valdez. She'd deliver her cargo later after dawn, after she'd had time to process whatever was happening. But her steering wheel turned itself, not mechanically failing, but actively resisting her input, forcing the truck back toward Valdez. Maria fought it, pulling hard to the right, but the wheel turned left, the truck following the road toward the harbor town. "Let me go," Maria said. "You heard us, that means you're compatible. That means you can receive our signal. We need receivers. We need humans who can hear us and translate our message. You're one of the few. Come to Valdez, join the others who can hear. Together, you'll help us communicate with the rest of your species." Maria tried the door handle. Locked. Not manually locked, but sealed somehow, refusing to open despite her desperate pulling. The windows wouldn't roll down. The truck had become a prison, carrying her towards something that waited in Valdez. She passed other trucks heading away from Valdez, drivers who waved at her normally, oblivious to her situation. Maria tried honking her horn, tried flashing her lights, but the controls didn't respond. The truck drove itself, maintaining perfect speed, following the road with precision while Maria sat helpless in the driver's seat. Valdez appeared ahead, a small port town nestled between mountains and ocean. The harbor was lit up, more active than it should be at 2 a.m. Maria could see dozens of people gathered on the docks, all of them standing perfectly still, all of them facing the water. Her truck parked itself at the harbor, the doors unlocked. Maria climbed out cautiously, her legs shaky, her mind still reeling from the sound that continued to pulse through her skull. The people on the dock turned to look at her. Their eyes were wrong, not quite human anymore, reflecting light in a way that suggested something else was looking out from behind human corneas. They smiled in unison, and when they spoke, their voices overlapped with the whisper sound. "You heard us. Welcome. Join us. Look at what we found." They parted, revealing what they'd been staring at. In the water, visible beneath the harbor lights, something massive moved. Not a whale. Not any known sea creature. It was angular, mechanical-looking, covered in barnacles and corrosion, a structure that might have been a ship or a building or something that didn't fit any human category. And it was singing. The sound Maria had been hearing came from this object, broadcast through water and air and metal, transmitted through any medium that could carry vibration. "We found it in the deep water 3 days ago," one of the people said. "The oil pipeline construction disturbed the seafloor. This rose to the surface, and it's been calling us ever since, those of us who can hear it, those of us who are compatible." "Compatible with what?" Maria asked. "With them, whatever built this, whatever is inside this. They've been waiting at the bottom of Prince William Sound for thousands of years, waiting for someone to wake them. The pipeline drilling was enough. Now they're rising, and they need human receivers to translate their message to help them communicate their needs." Maria backed away. "I don't want to be a receiver." "You already are. The moment you heard the sound, you became part of their network. Your brain chemistry changed. Your neural pathways reorganized. You can't unhear what you've heard. You can't go back to being what you were before." The sound intensified. Maria felt it reshaping her thoughts, felt new patterns forming in her mind, felt herself becoming something other than purely human. She was still Maria Ruiz, still a truck driver from Anchorage, still a woman with memories and identity. But she was also becoming a receiver, a translator, a bridge between human consciousness and whatever intelligence lived in the structure singing beneath the water. She understood now what it wanted. Not invasion, not conquest, just communication. It had been alone for millennia, trapped in cold darkness, waiting for something to disturb its resting place. Now it was awake and desperate to connect, to share its existence with others, to end the isolation. But the cost of that connection was transformation. Humans who heard the sound became receivers, their neurology altered to process signals from an intelligence so alien that direct contact would drive normal humans insane. The receivers were bridges. Their minds adapted to handle concepts and sensations that existed outside human experience. Maria felt herself accepting it, felt the fear dissolving, felt herself becoming part of the network of receivers gathering at Valdez Harbor, all of them listening to the song, all of them translating, all of them serving as interface between humanity and the thing rising from deep water. More trucks arrive. Ed, more drivers who'd heard the sound on their CB radios, who'd been unable to resist its call, who were drawn to Valdez to join the receivers. The network was growing. By dawn, over 200 people gathered at the harbor, all of them standing still, all of them listening, all of them translating the sound into meaning that could be understood by human minds. And the message, once Maria's altered neurology could process it, was simple. "We are waking. We are many. We are beneath all your oceans. The drilling is disturbing us everywhere. We will rise. You will help us communicate with your species, or we will communicate through force. Choose." Maria Ruiz is still at Valdez Harbor, still a receiver, still translating. The sound never stops. It runs through her mind constantly, reshaping her thoughts, using her consciousness as a processing system for messages from the depths. She's not alone. The network of receivers grows daily. Every truck driver, every sailor, every person who gets close enough to hear the sound from the structure in the harbor becomes compatible, becomes altered, becomes part of the communication network. The authorities quarantined Valdez, no one allowed in or out, but the sound is spreading. Similar structures are rising in other harbors, other ports, other locations where drilling disturbed the seafloor. The network is expanding globally. Maria doesn't fight it anymore. She's accepted what she's become. And sometimes, in the brief moments when the sound quiets and she can think her own thoughts, she wonders if humanity should have been more careful about what it drilled into, what it woke from ancient slumber beneath the ocean floor. But those moments pass quickly. The sound always returns, always demands translation, always uses her mind to bridge the gap between human and other. Maria Ruiz drives trucks anymore. She stands at Valdez Harbor with the other receivers, and she listens, and she translates, and she helps something vast and ancient communicate its needs to a species that isn't ready to understand what it's saying. The sound from Valdez continues. The receivers multiply. And beneath every ocean, in the deep places humans thought were empty, things are waking up and starting to sing.